Well, hello everyone. Today we're going to review for our assessment, and this period of time is on the Revolutionary War. At the start of the Revolutionary War, European nations were competing with each other for power, for world resources, for military strength, for political superiority. The Revolutionary War was also called the War for Independence. The war started in 1775 when the first shot was fired in Lexington and in Concord, Massachusetts. The war ended in 1783. Events leading to the American Revolution. Now, what you see before you is actually the first political cartoon, and it was created by Benjamin Franklin. The reason why he created it had to do with the meeting that was held in Albany, New York, and the purpose of the meeting was actually for the colonies to figure out a way to sit down with the Native Americans as a group and settle their differences peacefully. Well, Franklin had an idea, and it was called the Albany Plan. And part of it was the colonies coming together, giving up some of their power for the sake of the group. And in promoting this, Franklin's political cartoon was actually published throughout all the colonies. And as you can see, it's a snake cut up. You see the Northeast up in the head section, and then the colonies after that. And what he was trying to tell us, that the colonies need to join, or they're going to be dissolved. They're going to die. And this was actually turned into a flag during the Revolutionary War, symbolizing the colonies are joining rather than die. Now, during class, we worked on the Albany Plan, and part of the process, you had to create your own cartoon, similar to what Franklin did, using a different animal, draw, label it, color it, and then write a paragraph explaining your cause. Many causes, and it's a combination of causes that lead to the Revolutionary War. We're going to be discussing how the French and Indian War affected it, the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Townshend Act, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the Writs of Assistance, the Intolerable Acts, including the Quartering Act and the Quebec Act. The French and Indian War, 1784. Rivalry between the French and the British. Who will control North America? The British colonists and Native American allies fought the French and Native American allies. Great Britain's national debt nearly doubled during the war. British expected the Americans to help pay for this protection. As a result, the Sugar Act, 1764, was passed. This was the first attempt to raise income from the colonies. Duty or tax on sugar and molasses that was not purchased from Great Britain. It also raised taxes on goods like sugar, textiles, wine, coffee, indigo. A big part of this particular act was the fact that if colonists were caught smuggling, the cases will now be tried in tribunals represented from Great Britain. So it was taken away from the colonists to try their own people in cases of smuggling. The Stamp Act, 1765. First internal tax paying for British protection. An official government stamp required pretty much on every single piece of paper that you could think of, from newspapers to playing cards, uh, even wedding certificates. Everything had to have a stamp, a British stamp, and you had to pay the tax for that stamp. On March 3rd, 1770, the Boston Massacre occurred. This is an engraving created by Paul Revere, who was by trade an engraver. Crowd of colonists threatened British soldiers. The British opened fire. 5 Americans lay dead. Parliament canceled the Townshend duties. In 1768, protests by colonists made British colonial officials nervous. Great Britain sent troops to Boston, and they set up camp in the center of the city. By beginning of 1770, over 4,000 British soldiers in Boston with 15,000 residents. The soldiers in Boston acted rudely and sometimes violently towards the colonists. Soldiers were mostly poor men and earned very little pay. Some stole goods from local shops and merchants. Some competed for off-hour jobs that the Bostonians wanted. March 5th, 1770, angry townspeople moved towards the custom house where the British taxes were collected. Colonists picked up sticks, stones, snowballs, clubs. The British sentry called for help. Crowd threw sticks and stones at the soldiers. After one soldier was knocked down and the British fired. 5 colonists were killed. One was Crispus Attucks, who was part African American, part Native American. He was a dock worker. Colonial leaders used the killings as propaganda. Propaganda is information made to influence public opinion. Samuel Adams put up posters that described the Boston Massacre. Bostonians called for a stronger boycott on British goods. Parliament repealed the Townshend Act taxes except the one on tea. Colonists ended their boycott as a result, except the boycott continued on tea. Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre. 3 weeks after the Boston Massacre, Paul Revere historic engraving, The Bloody Massacre. Probably the most effective piece of propaganda in American history. Not an accurate depiction of what took place. It was used to shape opinion. The engraving was based on that of an artist, Henry Pelham, who created the first illustration. Henry Pelham was neither paid nor did he receive credit for his work. If you look closely at the engraving, the British implied as the aggressor, when in fact it was the colonists who were the aggressors. The British were lined up, and an officer is giving orders to fire. Colonists showed reaction to the British when in fact they had attacked the soldiers, reacting to the British when they in fact had to attack the soldiers. British faces were sharp, angular, in contrast to the Americans' softer, more innocent features. British soldiers looked like they were enjoying the violence. Colonists, who were mostly laborers, were dressed as gentlemen. The only 2 signs in the image that can be read are the Butcher Hall and the Custom House, and are both hanging directly over the British soldiers. Appearing to be a sniper in the window beneath the Butcher Hall sign. There appears to be a sniper in the window beneath the Butcher Hall sign. There's a dog in the picture. There's a dog in the picture which symbolizes loyalty and fidelity. The dog in the print is not bothered by the mayhem behind him and is staring out at the viewers. Crispus Attucks is visible in the lower left-hand corner. There are other copies existed in print where he is portrayed as an African American, but most he was portrayed as being a white colonist. In the print, there's no snow. In fact, by testimony presented at the soldiers' trial, there was in fact snow, and snowballs were thrown at the soldiers. Townshend Acts of 1767. They are import duties or tax on tea, lead, glass, paint colors. Money was to pay the royal governors. Colonists complained, no taxation without representation. Colonists felt they should not be taxed because they did not get to elect anyone to Parliament. Boycotted English goods. Sons of Liberty were formed, a group that opposed English rule and advocated independence. John Adams wrote in 1769, dined with the 150 Sons of Liberty at Robinson's, the sign of Liberty tree in Dorchester. To the honor of the Sons, I did not see one person intoxicated or near it. It's interesting how the Sons of Liberty were formed. Prior to them being called the Sons of Liberty, they were rival gangs on each side of Boston. And these gangs would get together once a year and fight each other. It was like a match, like a football game, but they would fight each other. And the winner then could boast until the next year as being the most powerful and winning the fight. Well, John Adams was talking to a group and said, why don't we, instead of fighting each other, start fighting the British? And that's how John Adams formed the Sons of Liberty. In 1773, a group of the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, boarded ships in the harbor that were carrying tea. They dumped over 300 cases of tea into the harbor. Now, the British East India Company owned the tea, and they faced ruin. To save the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act, gave the company a monopoly, which is sole control of the trade for tea in America. It permitted them to sell the tea directly to the shopkeepers and bypass colonial merchants who normally distributed tea. The colonial merchants called for a new boycott. Colonists vowed to stop the Indian Tea Company's ships from unloading. The Indian Company shipped tea to a number of colonial cities. Colonists forced the ships sent to New York and Philadelphia to turn back. Acting swiftly, the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, and boarded the ships at midnight on December 16, 1773, and threw 342 chests of tea overboard into the Boston harbor. John Adams wrote in 1773, last night 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This morning, a man of war sails. This is the most magnificent movement of all. John Adams could see, as a result of this, that a revolution was soon to take place. The Intolerable Acts of 1774. British called it the Coercive Acts, and the colonists called it the Intolerable Acts. It closed the port of Boston. American towns meetings were banned. British officials would conduct the trials of smugglers rather than in the colonial courts. These were all in direct response to the Boston Tea Party.